It was a really interesting conversation and how many of them had never even thought about that.
We're starting to get back into the notion of negotiating the boundaries that are going to be those that you apply consistently.
Think about in the workplace, what is the appropriate level of sharing?
Welcome back, Rabble-Rousers. This is Carla.
I am Doc Shelley.
And we are going to carry on with our conversation about boundaries.
Boundaries. Where are we going to take it today?
Well, we started out by defining it and defining the term and how it plays into things in general, both personal and professional. Today we're going to talk about specifically two kinds of boundaries. Two, personal and workplace. And the point of this would be to understand that there are differences in how we might manage the boundaries, there are considerations that do cross over. And what we're going to do is just run through and discuss how those things look from the personal point of view and then work it over into the workplace.
Excellent. Should we start with personal?
I think so.
All right. So when we talk about personal boundaries, I think the first one would be physical boundaries.
Okay. Yes.
And so really, particularly as a woman, I am only one. As a woman, I think about how many times I have gone on business trips by myself. And I remember having conversations with some of my male friends about not sitting in the hotel lobby or sitting in the hotel bar by myself, making sure that when I go back to my room, nobody's following me, and all these precautions that I would take for my physical safety. And these were also men that would travel quite a bit for work, and they're like, what do you mean you don't sit at the hotel bar and have a couple cocktails? If I'm by myself, I do not do that because I do not want some strange man or strange woman to follow me back to my room. I am a short person. I don't have a lot of physical raw that it's going to intimidate somebody. So I just made that a boundary for myself that when I go on business travel, I don't sit at the hotel bar by myself and have any cocktails.
I think that's a great demonstration of how the boundaries do influence the choices you make.
Absolutely.
About what you will and won't do.
Yeah. So when we talk about boundaries being part of your value system, that's where that comes into play. But it was a really interesting conversation and how many of them had never even thought about that from their perspective. And they thought, oh, wow.
And it is a very interesting challenge that I actually had a business idea at one point that I was going to develop a chain of restaurant or bar type settings called the Quiet Spot. And it was going to be one that would allow a person to come in, a woman traveling on her own for business. At that point, that's what I was thinking about. And that each of the booths would be where you could be set away from everybody else, yet you could, if you wanted to, have a view out into the place. I wanted to have a roaring fireplace and individualized channels you could draw in on. This is way before carrying around your phone was an entire
right.
radio and music library and all that. So, but the notion of not just feeling safe, but being able to relax, that's a part of feeling safe. And when you're away from home and, I don't know, sitting in the hotel room became it got old fast.
Yeah, I remember years ago, that's a really cool idea, by the way. I remember years ago, a few of us were on a business trip, and the only other woman on the trip and I had adjoining rooms, ironically. And we had just come back, a group of us, it was the two of us and maybe 3 or 4 guys, and we had just come back from dinner, and we were going to go out that evening. And for whatever reason, decided not to. And as soon as we made the phone call to say, hey, we're going to stay in tonight, about 10 minutes later, I happened to be in her room, and there was a big bang on the door. And we thought it was one of the guys that we were traveling with. And she went to just open the door, and I stuck my foot in the door, and I peeked out the peephole. It was not one of the guys we were traveling with. No idea who it was. But he did not belong there, and he should not have been knocking on our door.
It's scary. It just can be scary, and I'm certain there are things that happen to men as well.
Absolutely.
That you have a perspective that says I'm safe here, and there are people out there who are going to do their best to prove that you're not.
Yeah. So setting those physical boundaries for yourself are really important.
I think it goes beyond that. It goes to, if you are with a person, it's not you as yourself by yourself, traveling, but when you're with somebody else, the physical boundaries, what's acceptable in these circumstances. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that we're starting to get back into the notion of negotiating the boundaries that are going to be those that you apply consistently, to be able to understand that this is how far apart we might sit, or don't order a drink for me when I'm not present to receive it, whatever it might be. That the physical boundaries, you understand your playing field, your safe zone.
Yeah, and I think some cultural differences come into play there too. I think about traveling to Brazil for work. And I was traveling with someone who'd never been out of the country before. And I was telling her, so when you go into meetings, there's a little bit of chatter about your personal life before a business meeting starts, but you're also going to get kissed on the cheek. So just be prepared for that, because there's a lot of hugging and a lot of kissing on the cheek that happens. That is how they start their day. It's how they start their meetings. It's how they greet you. There's nothing meant by it other than I care and respect about you. And it was really funny. She got used to it right away. She's like, I love this. I wish we did this in Michigan. That ain't never going to happen. But it was really funny how quickly you can adapt to something in another culture that might be completely inappropriate in your own culture. You
also helped her by introducing that concept before it slapped her in the face.
Oh, yeah. She would have been like, get the hell away from me. Yeah. but it's interesting. And then other cultures, you would never even shake a person's hand. You would do something different to acknowledge a hello. So it's just, I think you have to keep some of those things in mind as well as you're perhaps dealing with different cultures than your own, too, and different norms.
Yes. And that then would move us into emotional boundaries.
Yeah.
This is big. Emotional boundaries. And again, we went, in the first episode, we talked about self-awareness, self-care, self-respect, and recognizing at the emotional level, there is so much vulnerability that really is the underscore for anything that happens that can test some of these boundaries. And while we're talking about it in the personal sense, I would say that it probably also crosses over into workplace as well. Again, working on the self-respect and the confidence that someone has. But in the personal space, let's talk some about emotional boundaries.
Yeah, so emotional boundaries are interesting when you think about it, because on its face, you think perhaps it's about not sharing your personal stories with maybe people who have violated your trust before. And you think about in the workplace, what is the appropriate level of sharing your personal stuff and your emotions to connect with other people? Because you want to connect. We connect by sharing our stories. So I think sometimes there's a fine line of how much are you willing to share and how much should you expect of other people to share. I remember doing an activity with an executive team at a large Fortune 100 company, and the whole activity was on vulnerability. And they were each given an assignment to go through kind of their careers and what were some of their highlights of their careers and their best lessons learned, and including in some of that was how it impacted your personal life. And it was really interesting to see the people who got really vulnerable. There was not a dry eye in the house. And other people were like, I could never share stuff like that. I respect them that they did, but I'm not going to do it. So it was really interesting, even when led by others, some people were not willing to violate their own boundary around what they thought was appropriate for workplace sharing. It's kind of interesting.
Very interesting. At the emotional level, we hold ourselves in a safe place. And we, at the same time as we are engaging with other people, we find ourselves perhaps triggering emotions.
Mm-hmm.
As a, for instance, one of the things that one might be prone to do if you see somebody who's getting really upset or they're frustrated or whatever, is you might violate a physical boundary while trying to attend to the emotional challenge the person might be going through, and you reach out to even just touch them. We have to recognize what's driving our emotion, what it might lead to in terms of violating somebody else's boundaries of connection, physical and otherwise. It's a very interesting how these things start weaving together.
Yeah. A friend of mine was at a conference one time, and she saw her absolute favorite author, and she wanted to get a picture with him. And she was so excited, and he said, "Is it okay if I put my arm around you?" And he put it around her in such a way that he didn't actually touch her. And in the photo, it looks like he's got his arm around her, but she was like, "He never actually touched me." But she's so respected, and she wouldn't have cared. He could have bear hugged her, and she'd have been in seventh heaven. But she thought it was really interesting how respectful he was, even just asking, "Can I put my arm? Is this okay if I put my arm around you?" And then not even touching her while he did it. She just thought, wow, that was incredibly respectful on 2 counts.
Mm-hmm.
Asking for permission and then not even actually physically touching her. She thought it was really cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And this day and age, I thought, wow, that's how appropriate. And, like, good for him for doing that and having the respect for himself and for the other people that he was in the presence of.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really cool.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
And then we have time boundaries.
Time boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I have been told that I guard my time, so apparently I have a lot of time boundaries. But I think about some of the jobs that I've had in the past, and in some jobs it's been easy for me to say my job ends at 5 o'clock. I'm done. Don't call me. I won't answer the phone. I'm going to go play tennis. I'm going to go play volleyball, whatever. And people respected that. And then there's been times where working in a global organization, time knows no bounds. And so sometimes it was a little bit more difficult to manage some of those boundaries that I like to have around my time of I want to have time to play my sports. I want to have time to I love to read. That's one of my de-stressors. And sometimes working in certain organizations or for certain teams, I didn't have that luxury. And so time for me is interesting. I can hold certain boundaries really easily, and other ones I have to acquiesce to say, what's the more important thing here? So
Acquiesce. Really interesting choice, because while you were speaking, the picture that was forming in my mind was the challenge about establishing for self, with nobody else involved, establishing for self time boundaries around. We do it with alarms to get up in the morning, or remember to take some medicine, or you know how long before an appointment you have to leave in order to be there to be on time. There's the getting up, and then there's the going to bed. There's some of these guidances we get now about the blue light from electronic devices to turn all of that off 3 hours before you go to bed.
Right.
I
do not abide by that time boundary at all.
But I'm saying that there are choices we make.
Right.
And it's not just about the imposition that somebody else might bring into my world by expecting something of me, time-wise, that I'm not prepared, perhaps, to give. And it's about understanding the boundaries I set for me in time. Like if I'm going to take part in one of those 10-minute, I'm just going to give my mind a break right now, I'm going to do it for 10 minutes. Now, if I happen to choose to do something like play Candy Crush, if that's going to be what I'm going to do to just de-stress, I need to honor the fact that I'm only going to spend 10 minutes on that, because you could go on It's like going through Facebook and
Right.
seeing all the...
You can get sucked in.
Right, exactly. So there's boundaries just about me managing me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the time boundaries that involve other people, when we can and can't call them. I have a good friend on the West Coast. There's 3 of us. One that's totally on the East Coast, me in Michigan, and Morgan is in California. And we'll get some kind of text messaging thing going back and forth in the morning, because Ed is on the East Coast and I'm in Michigan. And Morgan says, please, could we not text this early in the morning? Of course, our 7 o'clock is his 4 o'clock. And so it's even being aware of silly things like that.
Yeah.
And they're not silly, but simple things like that.
Yeah. I used to work with somebody who always wanted to take a lunch hour, no matter what. And I remember thinking, what a luxury. I can't tell you how many hours I worked through my lunch. But I needed time on this person's calendar, and literally the only time was during lunchtime, and for weeks. And I said, I know you like to have your lunchtime. This is the only time that you have during the workday, so can I take 15 or 20 minutes of your lunchtime, or can we meet before or after work? And he said, if you're willing to have me not be in front of technology, I will be on a walk. You can either join me or we can do a phone call. That way he didn't feel like he was violating what he needed from his lunch hour. And I said, you be wherever you need to be if you're willing to talk to me. That's all I need. So I thought that was cool that he said, I'll give you the time, but this is under these circumstances. So he was still able to hold his boundary and made some decisions around what that would look like. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of cool.
And what's interesting in the 3 elements that we've covered on the personal side of things, that the emotional, the time, and even the physical, they have a place in both.
In both. I can hold certain boundaries really easily, and other ones I have to kind of acquiesce to say, what's the more important thing here?